The bull's horn was snapped by a jaguar, but a soldier grabbed a log and fought back. The growl came low and sudden, like a crack tearing through the quiet. Darnell froze mid-sentence, the moss-covered map trembling in his hand as the firelight flickered across his wide, alert eyes. The jungle, once thick with the soft chorus of insects and rustling branches, fell into a terrible hush. Even the wind seemed to vanish. Nico, crouched across from him, stiffened. His usually sharp mouth shut tight. Beck, ever silent, had already reached for the pointed stick by his side. They weren't new to fear. Each man had faced it in training exercises, ambush drills, and sleep-deprived marches. But this wasn't fear. They were past that now. This was something more primal. Something in their bones told them the rules had just changed. The sound came again. Not closer, just clearer. A low rumble, like gravel caught in a throat. Darnell stood slowly, his fingers tightening around the nearest weapon he could find. A fire-warmed log, thick, still smoldering on one end. The fire cracked softly, sparks dancing in the humid air. Nico turned his head, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the edge of their camp. "Probably a wolf," he whispered, voice shaky but trying to sound unfazed. "They've got those out here, right?" Before Beck could answer, the thing stepped into view. It didn't crawl or creep. It walked out of the trees like it owned the ground beneath it. A jaguar, massive, midnight black, muscles rippling beneath its wet coat, each movement smooth and terrifyingly silent. Its eyes reflected the fire, but there was something unnatural in them. One burned a molten amber, the other, milky and clouded. A scar ran down the length of its cheek, and dangling from its thick neck was a rope tied around a bone. No, not just any bone. A bull's skull, old and weathered, with one horn snapped clean off. The beast paused at the edge of the clearing. Then it growled again, louder this time. "That's not normal," Nico muttered, taking a step back. "That's not natural." The jaguar lunged. Nico barely had time to scream before the creature crashed into him, knocking him straight into the shallow stream behind the camp. Water splashed violently, the campfire's glow suddenly dwarfed by chaos. Darnell surged forward, heart slamming against his ribs. He swung the log with both hands, the heat biting his palms, aiming for the jaguar's head, but missed. The creature moved with a predator's precision, darting sideways without releasing its grip on Nico. "Let go of him!" Darnell shouted, swinging again, teeth clenched. This time the log connected with the beast's shoulder. There was a hiss, a snarl, and the smell of singed fur. Beck joined in, jabbing his sharpened stick toward the jaguar's exposed side, but it might as well have been a twig. The creature knocked Beck backward with a single swipe of its paw, sending him sprawling into the mud with a grunt. The stick snapped in half. For a heartbeat, the only sounds were Nico's ragged breathing and the steady growl of the jaguar. Darnell stepped forward, holding the burning log between him and the creature. It stared back, not with the blank hunger of a wild animal, but something colder. Smarter. Its good eyes shifted between them, calculating. That's when Darnell noticed the glint. Near the creature's shoulder, half hidden by thick fur and scar tissue, was a metal tag. Thin, rectangular, embedded just beneath the skin. "Wait," he muttered. "It's tagged?" The beast backed up slowly, dragging Nico a few feet upstream, then paused again. It wasn't running. It wasn't retreating. It was guarding something. Beck pulled himself upright, wiping blood from his chin. His voice came out hoarse. "That skull on its neck, one horn snapped. That doesn't happen easy." He looked toward Darnell, his expression more serious than he'd ever seen. "That's not just any animal. It's tagged. This thing was released here on purpose." The words hung heavy in the air. Darnell's pulse pounded in his ears. He stared at the jaguar, his thoughts racing. Why would a military survival zone, meant for testing endurance, include a tagged apex predator? This wasn't part of the protocol. Every briefing had been strict. No digital interference, no advanced threats. But no one had mentioned anything about enhanced wildlife. No one had said anything about this. He thought back to their drop-off. Lieutenant Cray had smirked when he said, "Only the toughest come back whole." At the time, it sounded like tough love. Now it sounded like a warning. The jaguar released Nico at last. The limp soldier rolled into the water and didn't move. Darnell rushed forward, dragging him out by the arm. Nico was breathing, barely, but unconscious. The jaguar didn't interfere. It simply watched. Then, slowly, it turned and vanished into the trees, melting into the jungle like a shadow returning home. For several long moments, no one spoke. Then Beck said what they were both thinking. "This wasn't nature. It was a test, but not the one we trained for." Nico was gone. Darnell stood ankle-deep in the stream, staring down at the drag marks that cut through the soft mud and scattered stones. Blood smeared the water's edge in a faint, rusty swirl. A shredded sleeve fluttered in the current like a broken flag. His hands trembled as he crouched, fingertips brushing the damp fabric, his stomach churning with guilt and fear. He had stayed up as long as he could the night before, blade in hand, eyes peeled, the fire stoked high. But at some point, exhaustion had won, and in those unguarded hours, the Jaguar had returned, quiet, precise, merciless. Darnell didn't speak. He just kept his eyes on the ground, forcing himself to take deep breaths, trying not to fall apart. Behind him, Beck knelt near the fire pit, silently packing what little gear they had left into a makeshift bundle. He, too, avoided words, but Darnell could feel it between them, the weight of loss and something worse, betrayal. "I shouldn't have slept," Darnell said finally, his voice rough, eyes fixed on the blood-stained rocks. "You needed to," Beck replied quietly, not looking up. "We both did. It knew that." Darnell turned to him. "You think it was watching us the whole time?" Beck nodded once, slow and grim. "It waited for the right moment. That's not random animal behavior. That's tactical." The word sat heavy in the air. Darnell stood, brushing the dirt off his palms. "I don't care what that thing is. We're getting out of here." "Then forget the capsule," Beck muttered. "That mission's already dead." Darnell didn't answer. He didn't need to. The data capsule, the entire reason they were in this jungle, felt like a joke now, like bait on a hook they hadn't seen until it was too late. They moved out slowly, tracking east along a narrow game trail marked faintly on their moss-covered map. The thick jungle swallowed sound, turning every snapping twig into a warning bell. Darnell's grip tightened around a jagged branch he'd turned into a club. His eyes never stopped moving. 3 kilometers in, they found what used to be another team's base. It was a wreck. Tents had been shredded, their nylon walls hanging like tattered curtains from splintered poles. Blood was sprayed across a smooth rock near the fire pit, long dried into brown stains. A ration pack lay torn open nearby, untouched. No signs of wildlife scavenging, no signs of resistance, just destruction. And beside the ashes of a collapsed fire, something familiar, a bull's skull. It lay half buried in leaves, its right horn broken off, facing the jungle as if pointing to something unseen. Darnell knelt and brushed the dirt away slowly. The knot around the skull's base was the same as the one on the Jaguar's neck. "This is a pattern," Beck said, crouching beside him. "It's not just killing, it's leaving marks, warnings, or trophies." Darnell stood, cold running down his spine like ice water. "There were 6 teams out here, us included." Beck nodded. "How many are still breathing?" Neither of them answered. They scouted the area in silence, rifles of bamboo in hand, but found nothing else. No tracks, no bodies. Whoever had been here, they were either gone or taken. That was when Darnell remembered something from the original orientation packet, a small footnote he had barely glanced at the time. Velvark Dynamics. The name rang in his head now like an alarm bell. The company had been introduced as a strategic partner, working with the Defense Corps on experimental field testing. Their specialty? AI-controlled wildlife simulation and advanced behavioral augmentation. He stopped in his tracks. "Beck," he said slowly, "what if that Jaguar isn't natural?" Beck looked up. "What do you mean?" "What if it was built, or modified, tech-enhanced, designed for testing soldiers under realistic threats?" Beck narrowed his eyes. "Like a biomechanical hunter?" Darnell nodded. "It had a tag, it moved with purpose, and its eye, one was almost robotic." Beck considered this for a long moment, then said, "Then this isn't a survival drill anymore." Darnell looked toward the dense canopy above them. "It's a trap." The objective shifted in an instant. It was no longer about retrieving a data capsule or completing a mission. It was about getting out alive. They returned to their own camp before sundown, warier now, slower in every movement. The forest was different, darker, somehow more watchful. They couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was following them. As Beck cleaned out the fire pit, Darnell went to work. He picked through the fallen limbs and rotting trunks near the riverbank, searching for the thickest, heaviest branches he could carry. His hands were blistered, his breath short, but he didn't stop. Every branch he tested for balance, every log he measured for swing range. He'd played baseball in high school, third base, fast hands, strong wrists. He was going to use every bit of that now. He found one that felt right, slightly curved, thick at the handle, light enough to swing. He stripped it down with a stone and sharpened the edges, sweat pouring from his brow. Then he went to the fire pit and started carving stakes, 10 of them, long and sharp, and buried them in a tight ring around the sleeping area. Beck watched silently, nodding once in approval. "Planning for tonight?" "I'm not letting that thing catch us off guard again." "You think it'll come back?" "I know it will," Darnell said. "We're not just targets. We're being tested." He didn't say how he knew. But somewhere above, hidden high in the jungle canopy, a tiny black drone hovered silently. Its lens rotated, zooming in on the movements below. A thin antenna flickered with data pulses, and hundreds of miles away, inside a dark control room lined with screens, a man in a gray suit leaned forward in his chair. "Subject 3 has adapted," he muttered, watching Darnell build a makeshift defense. "Let's see how he handles Phase 2. Another voice, younger, colder, replied through a headset. "Orders from Velvark. No extraction. Observation only." Back at the camp, the fire cracked and popped as dusk fell. Beck dozed off against a log, worn from the day's trek. Darnell sat just beyond the ring of sharpened stakes, the heavy branch resting across his lap. His eyes burned, but he forced them to stay open. He wasn't going to be the reason someone disappeared again. In the flickering firelight, his mind raced. He thought of Nico's scream, of the bull skull, of the claw marks that shredded nylon like tissue paper. He thought of the tag embedded in the Jaguar's neck, the horn broken clean off, and he thought of Lieutenant Cray's last words during the drop-off. Some teams won't come back, not because they failed, but because they'll be eliminated. Darnell gripped his weapon tighter. The game had changed, and what they didn't know was that they were already being watched, from a hidden drone overhead, controlled not by the military, but by Velvark's private security division. The test had become a hunt, and they were the entertainment. Beck's scream tore through the jungle just before dawn. Darnell jolted awake, heart hammering, lungs still heavy with sleep. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, barely lighting the inside of the tent. But the sound, raw, panicked, cut through everything else. He scrambled out, grabbing his torch with one hand, the sharpened spear with the other. Outside, the mist clung low to the ground, thick and silvery, curling around their gear like ghostly fingers. And there, at the edge of the camp, Beck was being dragged. The Jaguar stood atop him, its jaws clamped just above his shoulder, pinning him down with terrifying ease. It didn't rush. It didn't kill quickly. It looked at Darnell and growled, a low, deliberate sound like a challenge. Darnell didn't flinch. He rushed forward, teeth clenched, swinging the torch high. The fire hit the creature's side, hard, and the flame hissed on contact. Its hide shimmered oddly in the flickering light, as if its fur had been laced with something synthetic. Where the fire touched, flesh sizzled. The Jaguar snarled and recoiled, its claws raking through the dirt as it sprang back. Beck rolled free, groaning, one hand clutching his torn shoulder. But Darnell didn't stop. He dropped to his knees beside Beck, checked he was breathing. He was. Then rose and met the Jaguar's stare. It paced slowly now, circling the dying fire, hackles raised. One side of its neck pulsed with a faint red glow. Darnell saw it clearly this time. Embedded just above the shoulder, under old scar tissue, was a chip. Not a tracker. Something more. It blinked steadily, each flash pulsing like a heartbeat. The creature's good eye locked onto him, unblinking. This wasn't just an animal. It was a weapon. And Darnell had run out of time. He swung again, the torch arcing in a wide sweep. The Jaguar dodged, but Darnell followed through with the log he'd been carving for days. Thick, heavy, curved like a bat. The wood cracked hard against the beast's jaw, a sharp thwack echoing through the trees. The Jaguar staggered, limbs buckling for a split second. That was all he needed. Darnell lunged forward, slamming into the creature's side with every ounce of strength he had. They tumbled down the slope behind the camp, rolling, slipping, crashing through brush and vines, until they plunged into a shallow ravine lined with sharp stones and thick, sticky mud. Pain exploded through Darnell's ribs as they hit the rocks, but he didn't stop. He reached blindly, grabbing whatever he could, a jagged branch, a smooth stone, even his fists, and struck again and again. The Jaguar thrashed beneath him, clawing wildly. Its breath was hot and foul against his face. Darnell's hands found the riverbed. A thick log, half submerged in the mud, was just within reach. He dragged it free and raised it over his head, then drove it downward into the flashing chip. The reaction was instant. The Jaguar convulsed violently, its entire body jerking upward as if struck by lightning. Its back arched, its limbs kicked out, claws raking empty air. The chip blinked faster, turning red, then white. Then, dark. Silence. Darnell gasped for breath, every muscle trembling. Mud soaked through his uniform, mixing with blood and sweat. He collapsed beside the creature, chest heaving, eyes unfocused. But he wasn't done. He crawled to the Jaguar's neck, fingers shaking, and tore the chip loose. It came out with a wet snap, wires clinging to sinew. The device pulsed once in his hand, bright red, then dimmed to black. He stared at it for a long moment, then hurled it into the stream. The jungle didn't move. Not yet. Darnell pulled himself upright, body aching. He climbed back up the slope, half crawling, half dragging his weight behind him. When he reached the camp, Beck was still lying where he'd left him, his eyes half closed. "I got it," Darnell panted, kneeling beside him. "It's gone." Beck managed a nod, wincing. "Your face," he murmured, blinking through the haze. "You're bleeding." "So are you," Darnell muttered, pressing his palm to Beck's shoulder to slow the bleeding. He pulled off his outer shirt, tearing it into strips. They didn't speak for a long time. Later, when the sun finally crept over the horizon, Darnell dragged Beck back to what was left of their camp. The stakes he had planted had been crushed in the struggle. The fire pit was a mess of ash and scorched earth. Nico's canteen lay where it had been dropped 3 days ago, dented and muddy. Beck drifted in and out of consciousness as Darnell worked, rebuilding the fire, reinforcing the shelter, turning their gear into stretchers and slings. But he could feel it, even before he looked up. The air had changed. The jungle wasn't silent. It was waiting. Overhead, hidden among the branches, the small black drone zoomed in closer. Its lens adjusted, tracking Darnell's every movement. Hundreds of miles away, inside Velvark's private control room, the footage played on a dozen screens. A technician leaned forward, stunned. The subject took down Alpha 12, without any weapons. The room went silent. Then a man in a tailored gray suit turned slowly in his chair. He said nothing for a moment, simply studied Darnell's blood-covered figure dragging Beck through the mud. Then he spoke, calmly. "Extract them both, and make sure Rhodes doesn't make it back to command." Somewhere in the darkness, someone typed a sequence into a console. The Jaguar hadn't been the true predator. Now the real enemy wasn't a beast in the jungle. It was the people who had created it. 2 days after the Jaguar's defeat, a black military chopper sliced through the morning fog above the rainforest canopy. It hovered briefly over the wreckage of what had once been Camp Varn, now a hollow graveyard of broken shelters and scorched soil. Below, a flare still smoldered weakly. A rescue diver fast roped down, eyes sweeping the chaos, and within minutes they found them. Darnell propped against a tree, gaunt but alert, supporting the barely breathing weight of Beck across his lap. His eyes were bloodshot, lips cracked, muscles twitching with exhaustion. But he hadn't left Beck's side. Not once. He looked up at the soldier and simply said, "Help him first." The rotor wash stung his face as they were lifted into the chopper. The interior was sterile, humming with quiet machinery. Neither rescuer spoke. No unit insignias, no friendly chatter, just silence and clinical efficiency. That was Darnell's first warning. They didn't take them back to Fort Garris. Instead, the chopper banked west over unfamiliar terrain, then landed hours later at an isolated desert facility built into a canyon wall. Towering fences, motion sensors, and robotic sentries surrounded the compound. Darnell's limbs were too weak to resist as they pulled him from the helicopter and separated him from Beck. The last thing he saw before being dragged away was Beck's stretcher wheeled down a different corridor, toward the lower levels. He shouted after him, but no one answered. Later that day, Darnell sat in a bare interview room. One table, one chair, one camera in the ceiling's corner. His hands shook as he gulped down a meal bar. Then the door opened and in walked a tall man in a dark uniform. He had iron gray hair and eyes like still ice water. "I'm Commander Vale," the man said. He didn't offer a handshake. "You survived what 90% of operatives don't. Congratulations," Darnell looked up. "Where's Beck?" Vale didn't blink. "Recovering. I want to see him." "That's not your concern anymore," Vale said, placing a small black folder on the table. "You passed. You've been selected for our Experimental Tactics Division. We're offering you a future far beyond anything you had at Garris. No more simulation, no more protocol, real missions, real enemies." Darnell opened the folder. Inside were performance metrics, biometrics from the mission, and a crisp contract. He barely glanced at it. "I'm not signing anything until I see Beck." Vale's cold smile returned. "That's unfortunate, but expected." That night, Darnell lay on a cot inside a clean but sealed room. A camera tracked every movement. The air had the subtle hum of recycled oxygen. Something wasn't right. He couldn't sleep. Every instinct screamed that Beck was in danger. The stories Vale told didn't match what he remembered. No one mentioned the Jaguar being biomechanical. No one asked about the chip he'd secretly pocketed. And they hadn't asked how the Jaguar died. He stared at the spoon they'd given him during dinner. Thin metal, slightly curved, and sharp enough if twisted right. He waited. At 2 a.m., the guards switched shifts. He timed the rotation pattern. Every 44 seconds, the camera turned. At the 45th second, he jammed the spoon into the lock panel beside the door and twisted until sparks flew. Alarms didn't sound. The panel shorted. The door clicked open. He crept through sterile white hallways, ducking into shadows, following the airflow toward the server room. Every footstep echoed like a heartbeat in his ears. Past a genetics lab, a cybernetics bay. Then he found it, security room 3. The door was open, no one inside. Dozens of screens filled the wall. He scanned them. Camera 9, a young recruit running from a 6-legged wolf with silver implants. Camera 11, 2 soldiers screaming for help inside a pit filled with shifting sand, and something crawling underneath. Camera 14, a unit cornered by a panther with glowing red eyes and segmented claws that clicked like blades. Darnell's mouth went dry. They weren't training soldiers. They were testing weapons, on humans. He switched feeds. Finally, camera 21, a steel room. Tied to a chair, bleeding and unconscious, was Beck. Electrodes on his temples. A man in a lab coat stood beside him, writing notes. Beck wasn't recovering. He was being broken. Darnell's fists clenched. He had to move. But he knew brute force wouldn't work. He needed a distraction. Back in the hallway, he found a breaker box labeled Power Core A, sublevels. He opened it, tore out 3 wires, and jammed the spoon across 2 contact points. The lights flickered, then died. Sirens wailed. He sprinted back toward the lower levels. With chaos above, security had thinned. He found Beck's room unlocked, the guards running to respond to the blackout. Beck's head lolled weakly. His skin was pale, voice barely a whisper. "Darnell, they said you left. I'm here now. We're getting out." Carrying Beck on his shoulders, Darnell made his way to the maintenance corridor he'd seen on one of the camera feeds, a tunnel that led out of the facility into the desert. It was narrow, hot, and pitch black, but it ended at a rusted grate behind the perimeter fence. He broke through using a fallen pipe, pulled Beck out, and vanished into the sandstorm swirling beyond. They wandered the desert for hours, both dehydrated and disoriented. But Darnell had one card left, the Jaguar's chip, still hidden inside his boot. Using a makeshift transmitter cobbled from broken tech they'd scavenged, Darnell boosted the chip's signal and pinged an encrypted channel. "Come on, Jules, pick up." 2 hours later, a van pulled up. A man in a torn denim jacket stepped out, wiry, with thick glasses and a satchel full of gear. "You brought me a real mess this time," he muttered. "Let's get you off the grid." Jules Carden, once a decorated journalist, now a fugitive hacker, patched into the chip and uploaded everything. The Jaguar's kill data, the footage from the security room, mission logs, even Darnell's own helmet cam. Then he pressed send. The footage hit global networks like a thunderclap. "Illegal military testing on recruits. Biomech animals used against soldiers." Velvark's stock plummeted overnight. Protests erupted across major cities. Families of the missing demanded answers. Government officials claimed they had no knowledge, but the footage showed otherwise: signatures, orders, authorizations. The next morning, Commander Vale was arrested outside a corporate retreat. Cameras caught his stunned face as black-suited officers slammed him into a vehicle. Beck survived, barely. After months of therapy, he retired from all military work. Now he teaches wilderness survival to orphaned boys in the northern valleys. His voice is soft, but when he talks about the forest, his eyes light up. As for Darnell, he returned to Fort Garris once. Alone. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't ask for recognition. He walked past the old trail they'd once taken, down to the edge of the stream where it all began. In his hand, he held the snapped bullhorn, the same one that had cracked beneath the Jaguar's bite. He dug a small hole in the mud, placed it in gently, and covered it with both hands. The wind blew softly. Trees swayed overhead. He stood, looked up at the forest one last time, and walked away. Because the world needed to remember what they tried to forget. The bull's horn was snapped by a jaguar, but a soldier grabbed a log and fought back.